Hi guys! In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating and discussing Rembrandt's painting process, specifically focusing on his late style. I'm going to be walking you through the process, his techniques, and his genius. Over here is the reference I'll be using, and on top here are some of his paintings. I've also included a self-portrait, an unfinished painting, and some drawings that he's done. But let's get straight into it. Rembrandt loved painting elderly people, and it's quite evident in some of these paintings. Especially in his later style, he was able to be much more expressive with the way he sculpted the forms with paint. I'm first starting off by toning the canvas with a reddish brown. I've also indicated the landmarks of this gentleman's head, these landmarks being the top of the head, the bottom of the mouth, the bottom of the beard, and the sides of the head, the large, simple measurements. With the drawing, I'm referencing not only his sketches, but also this painting, where he's kept the drawing with brown paint visible. Rembrandt drew with paint, and he took great care when developing this stage of the process. Now, when it comes to drawing, we can divide it into two simple types: line drawing and mass drawing. When painting, Rembrandt and his contemporaries drew focusing on mass, rather than line. Mass drawing prioritizes the visible difference between light and dark, focusing on large forms and shapes, while linear drawing prioritizes defining everything with lines. So, when drawing like seen here, I'm focusing more on clearly separating the lights from the darks. To see shapes more clearly, it's important that you step back from your reference and squint. I talked about this in the last video, but squinting just allows you to ignore the details and focus on the larger shapes. Also flip your canvas vertically, like how you would use a mirror when painting traditionally. This allows not only a different perspective, but also makes errors in your work much more obvious, since we're constantly staring at the painting. As time goes on, it becomes more and more difficult for us to spot mistakes when viewing our work one way. So, it's important to utilize as many tools as possible. Like Rembrandt, I started with the large shapes first, always working from simple to complex. These are just paintings, so don't be afraid to throw paint around, but do so with intention. We all know that he loved lighting his models in a specific, dramatic way. This also made this style of drawing much easier, since it separated the lights from the darks more clearly. When drawing, Rembrandt would have probably started with something like this, focusing on mass and volume. From here, he would then measure the smaller shapes within these larger ones to indicate the features. A lot of scholars do not give him enough credit for his drawing ability, but believe me, someone who has thoroughly studied and applied his teachings, he was quite the draftsman. I always knew that drawing was important, but knowing that a foundation can be placed without the need to start with lines was revolutionary. It made drawing so much more comfortable for me. Drawing is simply measuring, so I actually use a handheld compass that I'd hold up to my reference, constantly measuring certain distances from my landmarks. For example, measuring from the top of the head to the top of the eyebrow, or from the side of the head to the edge of the nose. Remember, we're measuring shadow shapes and light shapes. I'm not actually measuring to the edge of the nose, I'm measuring the edge of that shadow shape. In this case, it just happens to be the nose. This, of course, is because the eye socket casts a dramatic shadow. I'm now starting to refine the drawing with a darker brown. I've also moved the reference down since I've zoomed in. I'm using this darker paint to finalize the drawing, also realizing that Rembrandt's drawing was also darker. He probably used pigments such as Van Dyke brown or raw umber for the drawing. I'm also carefully measuring smaller shapes to finalize the features. You'll also see quite dramatic changes as I realize some of the measurements that I've eyeballed were incorrect. I'm taking my time with this. It's most important. Yes, we want to get straight to color, but this is the foundation of the building, the foundation of the painting. I'm now adding highlights to the drawing. In traditional, this would be the equivalent of wiping the tone of the canvas back to achieve a lighter value. Now, I'm not too sure if Rembrandt actually worked this way, but I felt like the drawing needed it. But That's it from me when it comes to the drawing. I'm going to let you watch the rest of the process, or you can skip through to where I begin the block-in that's coming very soon. The block-in stage. In this stage, I'm simply going to be using this flat brush to lay in large shapes of color. I'm referencing Rembrandt's background choices, and it almost always seems to be this warm gray that shifts in value. He was a master of creating what I like to call a convincing sense of atmosphere. It's in all of these dark browns that he simply plucks the light out of. He knew how to attract attention and where. I do this block-in surprisingly quickly, but all I'm doing is setting up another foundation to build the lights on top of. We've already indicated the darks of the painting in the drawing stage, so now we develop the contrast with the lights. Rembrandt understood the oil painting medium best. He utilized the paint's natural plasticity to his benefit, keeping the shadows transparent and the lights opaque. Now I'm not going to get into what he mixed into his paints to achieve his desired effects, because we'll just end up in the middle of a rabbit hole. I'm trying to keep this stage loose and bold. I'm also paying close attention to the tonal values. I want them to be accurate in terms of a whole, but still keep them subdued. After I lay down these strokes, there's no recovering the drawing. I paint all in one layer, maintaining a traditional discipline. Yes, of course, I can just undo everything, but once I'm far along into the process, it would just be tedious. This is now very important. I wanted to achieve this effect Rembrandt does so well in his self-portrait with his shirt. He firstly laid down a red, and once it's dried, he glazed black over it. This gives the illusion of a specific fabric and texture, and I think it's done so well here. Therefore, I also wanted to experiment with this in my portrait. So in this block-in, the jacket will be left red, and later in the modeling stage, I'll lay a black over it. I'm placing very simple marks to indicate the lights in the head, still staying away from indicating my lightest lights. Rembrandt, like most artists, started out painting in a very refined and tight style, and it's later on that he began painting even looser and bolder, like we're trying to recreate here. But even early on, Rembrandt was known for pushing beyond the boundaries of what was accepted. He was an impressionist before the era of Impressionism. In his heyday, Rembrandt was extremely sought after. I don't think many people know just how in demand he was. And I think it's because he painted what he wanted, and clients just came knocking. He was tremendously talented and determined. But he was very ill-disciplined when it came to money, and eventually he became bankrupt, and soon after he was nearly forgotten. Rembrandt is part of the reason why I pursued painting, specifically in this very traditional dramatic aesthetic. I learned how to draw from him. I learned about sculpting with paint. And I learned that a portrait is not just a simple head and shoulders. It's a scene. I've now started the modeling stage. I first start by laying down black with a textured bristle brush. Again, we're trying to achieve the effect Rembrandt utilizes in his self-portrait. We want the red to show through, so it's important that we don't completely cover the red layer. This is time where we pay our attention to texture, but most importantly, the tonal values. Areas become both darker and lighter, so I'm blurring the edge of the jacket and the background. This allows the head as a light mass to pop forward, always thinking about a very theatrical atmosphere. For the modeling stage, I'm using this brush because of its streaky and painterly texture. All of these brushes I'll provide as a Krita bundle pack, down below in the description. The software I'm using is Krita, so if you're using another software like Photoshop, you'd have to try and replicate these brushes. We indicate the lightest lights during this stage. You could see it as the drawing being used to indicate the darks, the block-in to form the middle values, and the modeling stage to indicate texture and highlights. These wrinkles and folds in the skin are so fun to paint because we're able to be expressive and suggestive. In my opinion, older people are much easier to paint than younger ones. This is because of the obvious shapes and forms that could simply just be indicated. But with younger faces, especially on women, the forms turn much more gradually, so we would have to pay extra attention to turning the forms of the head convincingly. Like I suggested, Rembrandt used the different stages of the painting to his benefit. So we won't add much darks in the face now since we've already covered that during the drawing. This was also, if you can remember, why I switched to a darker brown. I'm using that same brown to suggest the creases in the forehead. It's quite obvious that Rembrandt used a very limited palette. This primarily consisted of earth colors, such as ochres, umbers, and siennas. He even used an earthy green. When it comes down to portraiture, he referred to these colors as friendly colors. These pigments were also cheap and easy to come by, since it's just dirt and clays. Because these pigments are from the earth, they're warm and desaturated, creating an automatic color harmony. This also suggests Rembrandt's view on color. Once he was wealthy, he could have easily invested in vibrant and expensive colors. But because of the type of pictures he wanted to create, these vibrant colors were unnecessary, focusing on the values. The dramatic contrast between the lights and the darks. I mean, just look at this self-portrait. The depth, the drama, and the atmosphere, all done with simple browns. Just genius. This also goes to show what can be done with little, once your fundamentals are solid. Understanding drawing, values, and color harmony. I've started placing thick and impasto paint in the lights. This is done with a three-dimensional brush that I'll also provide. Thick paint attracts attention because of its physical nature and because it reflects light. You'll notice just how pasty the lights look in this stage, drawing the attention. We're of course working in the digital medium, trying to recreate a traditional style. But I think it's fairly successful. You'll see in a bit that I add even more impasto since I felt like the lights could be even more pasty. We're nearing the end, and I'm just refining the values. I now transfer the painting to a larger canvas, adding and removing paint so that it sits well within this new frame. I wanted the painting to feel aged, so I also utilized a cracked texture brush. Over many years, oil paint naturally yellows, so to intensify this aged look, I'm applying a yellowish glaze. And there you have it, the finished painting. I'm very pleased with how it came out. I set out and achieved what I could. I learned a lot applying his method, and even reminding myself about his life and his teachings. But I hope you guys enjoyed this demo. Please let me know what you guys think. And you can find more painting tips in my video on alla prima painting on my channel. Anyway, stay in the paint.